create a series of prompts, create a series of context documents that you can reuse, and explore the framework in ways that you never could before and find ways of applying it.
Coffee's for closers only.
So we've established my proposal is sound in principle. Now we're just haggling over price.
Let's see how much we're going for on eBay.
Man, it's the same as Dunkin' Donuts. Costs 15 times the price.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Jennings Executive Search. I had a great conversation with John Jennings about the skills needed in different pricing roles. He and I think a lot alike. If you're looking for a new pricing role, or if you're trying to hire just the right pricing person, I strongly suggest you reach out to Jennings Executive Search. They specialize in placing pricing people. Say that 3 times fast. Welcome to Impact Pricing, the podcast where we discuss pricing, value, and the attention-based relationship between them. I'm Mark Stiving, and I run boot camps that help companies get paid more. Our guest today is the one and only Stephen Forth, and I'm actually going to tell you 3 things about him today. He runs Ibbaka, a value-based software and consulting company. He's probably the leading thinker in AI and pricing on the planet. And he has been on so many times by now, I can call him my friend. Welcome, Stephen.
Mark, and we can absolutely call each other friends.
Excellent. Glad to hear it. So I wanted to talk today just about AI, and who else would I talk to about it than you? Usually when we talk about AI, it's how are we going to use it in pricing? And maybe we'll get to that towards the end of the podcast, but I've just been so confused by all of the different AI models that are out there and all of the different possible uses for AI. I thought, who better to talk to about all this than you? Because you know it way better than I do. So before I ask any specific questions, feel like pontificating.
Okay, well, just to pontificate briefly, 2 sort of thoughts. One is I am hugely enthusiastic about generative AI, so treat everything I say skeptically. And second is I think it's really important to understand that no one model is going to serve all of your purposes. So any solution that is saying this is the model is, I think, wrong out of the box. So there are going to be lots of different models, just as if you were, wanted to talk to a doctor. You want to be able to get a second opinion. If you want to ask an generative AI model something, you want to be able to get a second opinion. And each of the major models has its own personality almost, and is better at some things than others. So,
well, I think that's a great place to start. What do you think are the best models out there, and how should we be? Which ones should we be using for what types of information?
So I think that the first thing to realize is that the world is the AI world today. It's all deep learning, and it's all based on Geoffrey Hinton and his crew's innovations around deep learning. But there are some very big differences in the types of model. So if you are interested in generating video or music or art, you're relying primarily on a diffusion model. And diffusion models are their own, I will say their own separate thing. So diffusion models are a really important part of AI, and they're not what we are usually talking about when you and I are talking.
Does that include graphics, as in pictures that people create?
Yes, but I check about every month. I check to see the progress on generating actually useful graphs, or useful, not just graphs, but sort of useful information. And my test case for this is UML, the Unified Modeling Language. So every month or so, I check progress on generating UML, and I don't care what kind of model's doing it. But right now, as of December 2025, I would say that all of these models are useless for generating UML and that sort of thing.
Yeah, quick correction. It's 2024 still, but that's okay.
I'm anticipating.
Yes.
You got to live a little bit in the future. So there's diffusion models. I think what, when you and I are talking, we're mostly talking about transformer models. And the when you said the attention-based relationship between them, there's a famous paper in 2017 from Google called "Attention is All You Need." And it's actually that paper that is the origin of most of the things that we think of, like GPT and Claude and Llama and Mistral's models and Grok's models from XAI. Those are all transformer models. Now there is work being done to connect transformer models and diffusion models in some really interesting ways. That will be a big part of what drives innovation over the next few years. And there's also a lot of work being done on building models that are much more numerical based. And these things are called large quantitative models. Or
But before we jump there, tell me about what is a transformer model? Is there a way to describe it other than it's what you and I talk about?
Yeah. So basically, a transformer model at its heart is doing a very simple thing. It chunks information up into what it calls tokens. So there's tokenization. For each token, there's a set of embeddings, and embeddings are the semantic and syntactical properties of that token. And all it's trying to do is to predict which token should come next. So that's really all transformer models are doing. They're saying, if I have this set of tokens, what token is likely to come next? And a token is like a part of a word. So it's like it depends on which tokenization you're using, but it's, for example, upstanding would be 2 tokens, one for up and one for standing. So the tokenization actually matters a lot, and each of these different models does the tokenization slightly differently. And
the one big difference between this and diffusion is we're talking specifically about language now.
Language and all the things that language encompasses, like code and musical notation, and some aspects of math. Large language models are getting better at math, but they're still essentially probabilistic. And math is good for understanding probability, but math itself is not probabilistic. It's not highly probable that 1 + 1 = 2.
It would be factual.
Yes. I have somewhere, which I'll try to, I'll dig it out and share it with you. I have a long thread that I did with GPT on does 1 + 1 = 2.
Nice. Okay, so let's go to the quantitative models.
Well, this is a new thing, relatively new thing. So large quantitative models, or LQMs, are something we're going to see a lot of over the next 12 to 18 months. And they're using the principles of deep learning, primarily with numerative data. So I think Bloomberg has done quite a bit of work on this. Bloomberg is an LQM, because anyone who has a lot, and remember, you have to have a lot of data to build a transformer model. It's fun to make a model on a very small data set. And I've built a couple of models myself, just using a very restricted data set. But because it's all probabilities, you get interesting but usually fairly bizarre results. So, in order to build an LQM, you need access to an enormous amount of data. Now, once people have the LQMs, just like with the large language models, then you can do really interesting things. You can augment them. So, I think that when most of us are doing, interest or sophisticated work with large language models, we're using some form of RAG architecture, Retrieval Augmented Generation, where we are giving the model a lot of additional context. so that it understands, I'm using the word understand loosely, so that it understands what we're trying to get at. So, most professional uses of generative AI and transformer models rely on some form of RAG architecture.
And is this what, say, Pro, Zilliant, Vendavo, these guys are using, the pricing systems?
No, they predate all of this. One of the things that they are struggling with is to figure out where they play in this reimagined world. And I would assume that they are looking at LQM and deep learning approaches to the data sets because they have lots of data. I'm not sure that they have access to and the rights to. Even if they have the data, I'm not sure what their rights to use that data look like to really generate LQMs. Someone like Bloomberg has a enormous amount of financial data that they've gathered, organized, and curated, or that's public data that they can work from. You take a Pros. Pros manages a huge amount of data and has some very sophisticated artificial intelligence approaches to understanding and manipulating that data. I'm not sure that they are legally allowed to aggregate it to build an LQM, though, because that data belongs, to their customers, not to them. So, I'm not sure what they're doing. We should get them on, and have a conversation with them. But I'm sure that they are looking at ways to do this, and they can take inferences that they draw from their existing AIs and use that in a retrieval augmented generation, a RAG style architecture, to combine it with large language models to get some really interesting new functionality, I'm sure. So we're going to see some super interesting innovation from these. I hope we're going to see some super interesting innovation from these companies over the next year or so, as they do mashups of large language models and their existing AIs. And then the open question, I think, is can they then go beyond that to the next generation of AI and build LQMs? But I suspect that what's going to happen is that it'll be sort of like what we do with retrieval augmented generation. That that you'll have a large LQM from Bloomberg or OpenAI, or Anthropic or whoever, because all these guys are building these models, and will find interesting ways of integrating.
We talked a while ago, and you had mentioned to me Wolfram's AI, Wolfram Alpha. Is that an LQM, or where does that fit in our hierarchy?
No, it's a completely different beast. So Wolfram is, that's the company that does Mathematica. And over the last decade, at least, they've been building something called Wolfram Alpha. Wolfram Alpha takes mathematical reasoning, and not probabilistic reasoning, but actual mathematical reasoning, and applies it to data. So as an example, one of the things that we do at Ibbaka is that, we generate value models. So we now have a system for generating a value model. But remember, we're generating them using a transformer and a RAG assisted transformer architecture. So one of the things that we do is that we take those equations, we pass them to Wolfram Alpha, and we ask Wolfram Alpha, so we say, one, is this a valid equation? This equation is supposed to do X, Y, Z. Does it do X, Y, Z? And we ask Wolfram Alpha to evaluate that. And then we ask Wolfram Alpha to simplify the equation. Those sorts of things Wolfram Alpha does far more reliably than any transformer model will ever do, I think. Now, the emerging story in transformer models is reasoning models. So you've heard of OpenAI's O1 models, and they're their conference last week, they were talking about O3, which is the next generation of O1, and they skipped O2. So no, you were not sleeping and they had O2 and you missed it. They actually went from O1 to O3. So,
that's a marketing ploy, Go ahead.
Yeah. The CEO, Sam Altman, explains why they did it, but it sounded something fairly silly. So, who cares?
Yes.
But anyway, reasoning models are going to be a very big deal, over the next 2 years, because they provide far better results for the kind of complex problem that people like such as you and I address in our daily work. So super interesting stuff. The other, and I know we're not here today to talk primarily about pricing, but the other really interesting thing is going to be, how are these things going to be priced? So here's a crazy idea. How much would you pay for, let's call it OpenAI 07? So it's in the future when it's even more capable. Would you pay $50,000 a year or $100,000 a year as a subscription to have something that capable to assist you? We think of these things as something we pay $20 or $200 a month for. But imagine that you had something that was capable of really doing deep reasoning. Would you pay a lot more for it? You might.
I might.
It would be like hiring a PhD, right? Oh.
Yes. I know we're not talking about pricing, but to me, this always comes down to the platform versus solution issue, right? And as long as I'm paying for a platform, I'm paying $20 a month. But if I'm going to buy a solution that's really valuable to me, it depends on how much value it's delivering.
Yeah, and I have to have a use for that.
Yep.
I wouldn't go and hire a PhD in applied mathematics just because I felt like having a PhD in applied mathematics working for me. I have to have something for that person to do.
Somebody's got to wash the dishes, Stephen.
Oh, that's good.
Okay, so let's jump back. I think we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about transformer models for a second, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm left behind. I feel like I'm not using AI well enough. I feel like other people are getting way ahead of me because they're doing things I'm not doing. So what am I missing here? What should I be doing? And this is, by the way, for everybody who's listening, right? I mean, we all feel the exact same way.
Well, I think all of us do, because it's rapidly changing. What these models can do is changing. So one of the things that I've noticed is I am, over the last 6 to 9 months, I've become hugely dependent on having my AIs available. So I generally have, one or the other AIs open in 5 or 6 different tabs at a time. So I've got multiple threads. I call them threads. So a thread is a series of prompts. So I've got multiple threads running. Sometimes they're related to each other, and I'm cross-pollinating the threads. And sometimes, I've just got one on, I need a new recipe for roasted cauliflower. So it would, be just a sort of blip that happens. So I've, I'm using them constantly, and I'm finding they're changing how I think. So, and I'm not sure if I'm comfortable or happy with how they're changing how I think either. So it's something that I really want to talk to people about and introspect on over the next year to understand the changes this is causing in my own thinking. But, I think we need to do this. We need to, if I believe anyway, as I said, be skeptical though, that this is the future, that we are all going to be heavily reliant on these to augment our own thinking and our ability to explore and communicate with people. So it helps to be all in.
Okay, so give us an example besides the cauliflower recipe. Give us an example of something that, you're sitting there working and all of a sudden it's like, oh, let me go ask AI that. What would you do?
okay, there are, that's one scenario. I don't think that's the most interesting one. I do that constantly though. So I'm always looking for things, or as I work, questions are always surfacing. We were talking earlier about service as a software. So service as a software is an idea that's come up, over the last 3 to 6 months as a new way about thinking about how AI is going to change services industries. So I went to an AI. I think I was using, which model was I using? I think I was using Llama in this case. And I asked it, what's service as a software? So just start with a naive question. Sometimes it's good to start with a naive question. I got very frustrated because it said, oh, you're confused. Service as a software is software as a service. No, I'm not confused. You're confused.
And if you said that, it apologized to you, I'm sure.
Yeah, it does. Well, no, actually, it took me a couple of nudges to get it onto the right track. Sometimes I find, working with these is like, trying to coax a 3-year-old.
Yes.
But anyway, so I'm constantly using it to explore ideas and help people understand ideas and how ideas are connected. But those aren't the most interesting things, I think. So for me, I found if you can take a well-developed framework, and two that I found really, really fruitful here are scenario planning and concept blending. And use it to actually help you do those things. So let's take scenario planning as an example. Scenario planning came out of work at the RAND, in the 60s. Was developed at Shell and a number of other organizations in the 70s, and has become its own discipline, in the ensuing time. And basically, what you do is you say, okay, what are the things about the future that we can agree on? And it turns out there's not that much, but things like demographics are pretty well settled. Moore's law, that the price was going to go down by half, and the capability of a semiconductor was going to double every 18 months. So there's a number of things that, at least for over time horizons of 10 to 30 or to 100 years, we can agree on are pretty well set. But then there are other things that we don't agree on, or that we can't know how the future is going to turn out. And these are critical uncertainties. And this scenario planning really consists of combining critical uncertainties in different ways to see what would happen depending on how the world turned out. So to pick something that is, still for some reason controversial, climate change. So you can say that, we are going, that climate change is actually happening, or you can say it's not. Let's just assume for the moment that there's some doubt about that. I don't think there is, but some people do. So rather than argue whether climate change is happening or not, you say, okay, under this assumption it is, and under this assumption it isn't. And then you combine that with another critical uncertainty, and you can generate scenarios that way. The classic example is the scenarios that were generated about South Africa as it was as the ANC was taking power. Incredibly compelling piece of work. But anyway, with generative AI, I can now create a series of prompts that allow me to rapidly generate critical uncertainties and combine them and compare them in a way that I couldn't do a year ago.
Huh.
And it allowed me and my team and my community to rapidly explore different possible futures in a way that I couldn't in the recent past. And it's just been mind-blowing. Some years ago, right when COVID was starting, one of my colleagues, Karen Chiang, and I came up with something called agile scenario planning, in which we said, that in classic scenario planning, the focus is on the scenarios. In agile scenario planning, the focus is on the critical uncertainties and rapidly uncovering them and comparing them. And we developed a process for this, and we did it with a couple of organizations, but it was too cumbersome. It's not something that anyone ever adapted, including ourselves. But with generative AI, all of a sudden this becomes incredibly doable and liked. So whatever frameworks that you've worked with in the past, I would just try to figure out a way to turn them into a set of prompts and a set of contexts, and start using them with AI. Maybe you're an old-fashioned strategy geek, and Porter's 5 forces model means everything to you. So you could turn that into a set of contexts and prompts, and rapidly explore, different, industries or companies or categories, and using 5 forces in a way that you couldn't do a year ago.
I find that absolutely fascinating, and I'm doing a lot of that right now in some work I'm doing just to try to apply the frameworks I teach all the time to an industry that I don't know that well. And it's fascinating watching how it works out. But I want to share with you one more thing I do, and I have to say that everyone listening should be doing what I'm about to describe. And that is, I emphasize the problem. People have problems. Value comes from solving problems. And so rarely do people understand problems. Do companies understand problems? Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes before I talk to a new client, I'll go look at their website and I'll say, hey, tell me a story about someone who buys this product. And it's just a beautifully written story that says, here's the problem these guys are dealing with. It's like, you could do this yourself and have a much better understanding of the problems that you're dealing with. But I get on these calls and understand the problems better than my clients do, just because I use AI for that purpose.
Yeah. And I think that's a great example, right? This is how, people, knowledge professionals should be exploring AI. Take a framework that is meaningful to you. It could be Porter's 5 forces. It could be Clayton Christensen's disruptive innovation. Could be value-based pricing. Could be scenario planning. There's scads of these things out there. Create a series of prompts. Create a series of context documents that you can reuse, and explore the framework in ways that you never could before, and find ways of applying it. Because it used to take Ibbaka between 40 and 60 hours of work by a highly trained person to build a value model. It now takes us, less than 2 hours to build a better value model than we could have done before. And most of that 2 hours is actually not the value modeling part. It's building the context about the industry or the category and the solution. That's what takes the time. And generating the value model, once you have the right set of prompts, the right set of context documents, you've orchestrated your prompt your prompt management system to do this, is fairly straightforward. And this is actually one of the places where we're using Wolfram Alpha, which we were talking about earlier. Right. As part of this process.
Okay. Last hard question for you. Help me with prompt management. I write new prompts every single time. And so it'd be really nice to have like a script maybe, or how do you do this? If you're going to try to apply the same framework over and over again.
Yeah. So, I think there's a simple way to do this, which is to just have a document or a spreadsheet where you keep your prompts and you iterate on them and improve them. So that's something anyone can do, and probably should do if they're using AI professionally. Beyond that, though, we're going to see over the next, it's happening now. Remember William Gibson's beloved quote: "The future is here; it's just not evenly distributed." Mm-hmm. So there is work happening right now on what I call prompt orchestration. which is, taking a prompt, taking a sequence of prompts, actually, not one prompt, but taking a sequence of prompts, knowing how they fit together, knowing how different models respond to the prompt, and going through an iterative improvement cycle. So the software to help you do that has been built. Stanford, I think, has a system that does that, and other places are, and I expect it will become, basic, software that we all have and use within the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, I lied. I'm going to ask you one more hard question. So quick story for you. I used to use ChatGPT almost exclusively. I switched to Perplexity because I have access to all these other models all of a sudden when I do that. And then I was using Perplexity. It created a table for me, an Excel file, but it wouldn't give me the Excel file. It said I had to have base code or something. So I went back to ChatGPT and it gave me my Excel file.
Yeah.
So now tell me what's going on.
Well, Perplexity has Perplexity's ability to access. So Perplexity is mostly accessing other people's models. So it's limited to what their APIs allow you to access. So, and there are, cases where the models are able to do more than can be accessed and transferred through their APIs. So this, it's a super interesting business problem, right? So what is the balance of power between systems like Perplexity and U.com that allow you to access, half dozen different models, but they're limited because they only get API access to those models. And people like Anthropic and OpenAI that are actually building the models. And so that they can they can do things that the people that are just accessing through their APIs can't. So they only have their own models, but they can do more with those models. Whereas Perplexity has lots of models and allows you to compare models and get synergies out of what different models are good at, but it doesn't have full access to the complete power of the models.
I hate to ask, how many are you subscribed to?
Well, this is now apart from people, this is our largest budget item. And so everybody at my company has Perplexity. A subgroup have the OpenAI Pro level, which is, is $200 a month per person expensive or not?
Depends on what they get.
Depends on what you're doing with it, right?
Yep.
But we need access to O1. So, and that's the best way to really get access to O1. Unless you're going to be using it, at the API level, which has its own costs. And then we're experimenting with U.com as well, because U.com has some slight differences in how the models are configured. And then additionally, some of us use models from Hugging Face, which has a huge collection of models available to it, most of which are let's be polite and say, most of which are not interesting. Mm-hmm. But there's jewels in there too.
Nice.
There's some incredibly interesting models available on Hugging Face. And Hugging Face also provides access to things like Llama, to any of the open source models. So, it's a diverse environment out there. I hate to say it, but I think most of us are going to need to have something like Perplexity or U.com, and we're also going to need a direct access to one or more models. So we're going to be spending a lot of money on this.
Stephen, as always, this is brilliant. It just reminds me that I know so little. So thank you very much for sharing what you know with us.
Yeah, well, there's a lot for us to learn. It's going to be 2025 is going to be an exciting year.
No doubt. So if anybody wants to contact you, how can they do that?
2 ways. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, and I'm active on LinkedIn. So that is probably the best way. And I'm for people on this podcast, I am happy to take your emails. Steven, Steven, at Ibbaka, Ibbaka.com.
Excellent. And to our listeners, thank you very much for your time today. If you enjoyed this just half as much as I did, please leave us a rating and a review. And if you have any questions or comments about this podcast, or if your company needs help getting paid for their true value, feel free to email me, mark@impactpricing.com. Now, go make an impact.
Thanks again to Jennings Executive Search for sponsoring our podcast. If you're looking to hire someone in pricing, I suggest you contact someone who knows pricing people. Contact Jennings Executive Search.